If you have ever recited the Apostles' Creed, you have said a line that most Christians cannot explain. He descended into hell. Say it again. He descended into hell, not into the grave, not into silence, not into a peaceful Sabbath rest while angels kept watch. Into hell. That's the word in the Creed. That's what 2 billion Christians confess every time those words are spoken. And if you're sitting there right now wondering, wait, what does that actually mean? When did that happen? Is that really in the Bible? Then you're exactly where we need to start. Because Holy Saturday is not the quiet, contemplative pause most teaching describes. It is the 36 most theologically explosive hours in human history. It is the day when something happened that no eye witnessed, no gospel recorded, and that the early church spent centuries arguing about. And one of those arguments, buried in the 3rd chapter of 1 Peter, in 11 Greek words that scholars still cannot fully agree on, may contain the most stunning description of what Jesus did between Friday afternoon and Sunday morning that exists anywhere in Scripture. We're going to get there. Stay with me. But first, the disciples' Saturday. Before we can understand what Jesus was doing, we have to understand what the people who loved him were experiencing. Saturday morning, the day after the crucifixion. Peter is somewhere behind a locked door. The text in John chapter 20 says the disciples were gathered together with the doors locked for fear of the Jews. That's Sunday evening, what? But the fear started Saturday morning and it didn't let up. Think about what Peter specifically is carrying. 12 hours ago, he denied knowing Jesus 3 times to a servant girl, not a soldier, not a Roman official. A servant girl asked him if he knew the man being arrested, and Peter said no. 3 times. And then the rooster crowed, and Jesus turned and looked at him, and Peter went out and wept bitterly. And then Jesus died, and Peter never got to say he was sorry. That is the weight Peter is carrying into Saturday. Not just grief plus unresolved guilt, the conversation that will never happen now, the apology with nowhere to go. And Judas, depending on what timeline you use, may have already taken his own life by now. Matthew chapter 27, verse 3. When Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders. He tried to undo it. He couldn't. And he went and hanged himself. 2 betrayers. One who denied and survived to be restored. One who betrayed and didn't survive to find out restoration was possible. That contrast, Peter and Judas, is one of the most important and most overlooked things about Holy Saturday. The difference between the 2 men is not what they did. It's what they did next. Peter wept bitterly. He ran from the grief, but he didn't run from God. Judas despaired. He believed the worst possible thing, that what he had done was too far gone for forgiveness. And the irony that breaks you if you sit with it long enough, the very man Judas had betrayed was, at that moment, doing something specifically designed to reach the people who believed they were too far gone. But we'll get there. Saturday, for the disciples, was also a day of profound theological confusion. They had been with Jesus for 3 years. They had heard him teach. They had watched him heal. They had been there when he raised Lazarus from the dead, when he stood at the tomb and called into it, and a 4 days dead man walked out with his grave clothes still on. They had heard him say things like, "I am the resurrection and the life." They had heard him say, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." And John tells us later that his disciples didn't understand he was talking about his body until after the resurrection. They hadn't understood it. They had the pieces. They just couldn't assemble them. Because the picture Jesus was painting across 3 years of ministry, the grain of wheat falling into the ground and dying, the sign of Jonah, the temple destroyed and rebuilt, the Son of Man lifted up, all of it pointed to exactly what was happening. But you can't see a pattern when you're inside it, not while your hands are still shaking from watching someone be crucified. And the disciples didn't have the book of Isaiah in their hands the way we do. I mean, they did. They had the scroll, But they didn't have the hindsight reading that makes Isaiah 53 so obviously about Jesus. He was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. We read that now, and we see the cross in every line. They read it before the cross. They didn't see it. They didn't have the interpretive key yet. Saturday was the day they sat in the dark without the key, and God let that happen. He didn't send an angel on Saturday morning with a note saying, "Don't worry, Sunday's coming." He let them sit in the confusion. He let Peter carry his unresolved guilt. He let Mary Magdalene cry through a night with no comfort coming. And there's something important in that, something the church has often skipped past in its rush to get to Sunday. God is not afraid of your Saturday. He doesn't always fast forward through the grief to get to the resolution. Sometimes he lets the silence be fully silence. Sometimes he lets you carry the weight of things you can't understand yet. Not because he's absent, but because something is forming in that darkness that couldn't form any other way. Now I want to slow down on Mary specifically, because I think her Saturday is the most overlooked and most important human story in the whole of Holy Week. Mary Magdalene, not the mother of Jesus, though her Saturday is also extraordinary. Mary Magdalene, the woman who had 7 demons driven out of her, the woman who became one of the most devoted followers in the whole circle, the woman who, according to John's Gospel, was the first person to see the risen Jesus on Sunday morning. But we're not at Sunday yet. Saturday morning, Mary Magdalene is grieving a specific kind of loss. She wasn't just losing a teacher or a leader. The relationship between Jesus and the people he healed, especially those he freed from years of spiritual torment, had a quality of personal intensity that is hard to describe from the outside. When 7 demons are driven out of you, the person who does it is not just a healer. They become something close to the reason you're still alive. The person who stood at the place where you were being destroyed and said, "No, come out, she's mine." And now he was dead. And Mary's response to this, which gets its full expression early Sunday morning, tells you something about the quality of her devotion. She goes to the tomb while it is still dark, before dawn, while the disciples are still behind locked doors. She can't stay away. She goes not because she expects a resurrection. She goes because she can't bear to be far from where he is. And when she finds the stone rolled away and the tomb empty, her first response is not joy. It's not even surprise. It's devastation. John 20, verse 13. The angels ask her, "Woman, why are you crying?" And she says, "They have taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they have put him. They have taken my Lord." Even in the moment of resurrection, her first interpretation of the empty tomb is that someone stole the body. Her grief is so total, her sense of loss so complete, that the empty tomb looks like one more thing taken from her. Saturday produced that quality of disorientation that makes even a miracle look, at first, like another wound. And this matters for us, because it means that even people who loved Jesus most genuinely, who were most faithful, who showed up when everyone else ran, they still didn't see it coming. Their faith on Saturday was not a confident expectation of Sunday. It was an aching, stubborn refusal to be anywhere else, even in the absence of hope. That is the only kind of faith Saturday can produce. And it is, apparently, exactly the kind of faith Jesus loves to meet. But God was not idle on Saturday, not even slightly. Here's something the competitor content almost never addresses, and it's the theological foundation for everything about Holy Saturday. Saturday was the Sabbath, not incidentally, deliberately. Go back to Genesis chapter 2. By the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing, so on the 7th day he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating. The Sabbath, the 7th day, is the day God declared finished, complete, done, the work of creation accomplished. Now, look at what happens in Holy Week. Jesus is crucified on Friday, the 6th day of the week, the day of preparation. the same position in the week as the sixth day of creation when God made humanity. Jesus' last words from the cross, in John chapter 19, "It is finished," tetelestai in Greek. Completed, accomplished, done, and then he rests in the tomb. On the seventh day, Saturday, the Sabbath. Do you see what's happening? This is not a coincidence of calendar. This is the author of creation structuring the redemption as a new creation using the same rhythms. God rested on the seventh day after making the world. Christ rests on the seventh day after remaking it. It is finished. The new creation is accomplished. And then Sunday comes, the first day of the week, the eighth day, the day that exists outside the original seven, the beginning of something new. The early church fathers called Sunday the eighth day of creation. They understood that Sunday wasn't just the day after Saturday on a weekly calendar. It was the beginning of a new order of existence, the dawn of the age that the first creation had been pointing toward. And Holy Saturday sits at the hinge between those two worlds, between the finished work and the revealed glory, between tetelestai and the empty tomb. It is the day that looks like death, and is actually the Sabbath rest of the one who has already won. Let's go back to Friday afternoon for a moment, because something happened at 3 o'clock, the moment of Christ's death, that is usually mentioned briefly and then passed over. Matthew chapter 27, verse 51. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, not from the bottom up, as if someone tore it from the ground while standing on a ladder, from the top down. The temple curtain, in Hebrew, the parochet, was the massive woven barrier that separated the outer courts of the temple from the Holy of Holies, the innermost room, the place where, in the theology of Israel, God's presence dwelt on earth. The Mishnah, the Jewish legal compilation, describes this curtain as being approximately 60 feet high, 30 feet wide, and as thick as the width of a man's hand. Woven from blue, purple, and scarlet thread with images of cherubim worked into it. The Mishnah says it took 300 priests to handle it. This is not a thin linen curtain. This is an enormous, massive, intentionally intimidating barrier, and it tore, instantly, at the moment of Christ's death, from top to bottom, as if God himself reached down from above and split it. The theological meaning is direct and enormous. The barrier between God and humanity is gone. The veil that separated the people from the presence of God. The veil that only the high priest could pass through once a year after extensive ritual purification with a rope tied to his ankle in case he died inside. That veil no longer exists. The way into the presence of God is open, not because the ritual system failed, because it was completed, fulfilled. The high priest has entered the true Holy of Holies, not the one made with human hands, with his own blood, once for all. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 12. He did not enter by means of the blood of goats and calves, but he entered the most holy place once for all by his own blood, thus obtaining eternal redemption. The torn curtain on Friday announced what the descent to Hades confirmed. The barriers are gone, every barrier, between God and humanity, between the living and the dead, between the old order and the new creation. Holy Saturday is the day that all of that is settling into place, invisibly, in the realm of the dead and in the silent temple, while the city goes about its Sabbath business. Now, the descent, the Apostles' Creed. He descended into hell. The Nicene Creed doesn't include this line, which is why many Christians have never heard it. But the Apostles' Creed, one of the oldest confessional statements in Christian history, dating to at least the 2nd century, includes it explicitly. He descended into hell. What does this mean? First, the word. The Latin in the original creed is ad inferna, to the lower regions, to the place of the dead. The Greek equivalent used in early Christian writing is Hades. the realm of the dead, the place where all the departed went, not necessarily the final hell of eternal punishment, the intermediate realm of the dead. And Hades appears 4 times in the New Testament directly in relation to Christ. Acts chapter 2, verse 27. Peter quotes Psalm 16 in his Pentecost sermon, "You will not abandon my soul to Hades, or let your Holy One see corruption." He applies this directly to Jesus, arguing that Jesus was not abandoned in Hades, but was raised. Acts chapter 2, verse 31. He was not abandoned to Hades. The implication is direct. He went there. He was not abandoned there. He came back. Revelation chapter 1, verse 18. The risen Jesus says, "I am the living one. I was dead, and now look, I am alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys of death and Hades." Keys. He holds the keys of death and Hades. Keys are for doors, and doors go somewhere. Jesus doesn't hold the keys of Hades as a trophy. He holds them because he went in, and he came back, and he brought the keys with him. Now, here's the passage that theologians have been arguing about for 2,000 years. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 18 through 20. "For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. After being made alive, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah, while the ark was being built. He went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits." In Greek, porotes ekeruxen, tois en phulak pneumazen. Went, proclaimed, to the imprisoned spirits. The word ekeruxen is crucial here. It comes from caruso, the word for a herald, a royal messenger making an official public proclamation. This is not the word for evangelism. It's not the word for preaching repentance and offering a second chance. It is the word for a king's messenger standing up and declaring something that has already happened. A victory announcement, not an invitation, a declaration. And who did he declare it to? The imprisoned spirits, those who were disobedient in the days of Noah. This is where the 2,000 years of argument begins, because there are at least 3 major interpretations of who these imprisoned spirits are and what the proclamation meant. Some theologians, particularly in the Reformed tradition, argue that Christ preached to these spirits through Noah. That is, Noah was the preacher, Christ was the Spirit working through him, and the spirits are now imprisoned because they rejected that preaching. This reading makes the whole event happen before the crucifixion, not after. Other theologians, including many in the Catholic and Orthodox traditions, argue that Christ physically descended to Hades between Friday and Sunday and proclaimed his victory to those who died in the flood. Not offering them salvation retroactively, but announcing that the cosmic order had changed. That death no longer had the final word. And a third group, influenced by 2nd century Jewish texts like 1 Enoch, argues these aren't human spirits at all, but the fallen angelic beings from Genesis 6 who corrupted humanity before the flood, now imprisoned in the abyss, and that Christ's proclamation to them was the ultimate declaration of victory over the spiritual forces of darkness. 3 readings, 2,000 years, still debated. What is not in dispute is this. Something happened between Friday and Sunday that involved Christ in the realm of the dead. The Creed says so. The text says so. The keys of Hades say so. The details are debated. The event is certain. Now, here's the passage that almost never gets preached on. Matthew chapter 27, verses 51 through 53. We already talked about the torn curtain, but the text doesn't stop there. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. Read that again. The tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life, and they appeared to many people in Jerusalem. This is in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 27. This is not obscure. This is not a marginal text. It's right there, 2 verses after the torn curtain. And it is almost never preached. Why? Probably because it raises more questions than most sermons have time to answer. Who were these people? Did they stay? Did they die again? Where did they go? The text doesn't say, but what Matthew is recording in his typically sparse, fact-forward style is that the moment of Christ's death triggered a cascade of events in both the visible and invisible realms simultaneously. The earth shook, physical response. The rock split, physical response. The tombs broke open, physically. The bodies were raised, physically. They appeared to people in Jerusalem, physically. This is not metaphor. Matthew is describing physical events, things that could be seen and touched and reported, and the detail that the text includes after Jesus' resurrection is significant. They came out of the tombs on Saturday, or perhaps that moment, but they appeared to people after Sunday, meaning the power of what was happening in the tomb was already working outward, already pulling people back from death before the stone was moved. The resurrection of Jesus is not just a private miracle for one individual. It is the event that begins to reverse death universally, the first resurrection pulling other resurrections in its wake. A stone dropped in still water, with rings spreading outward in every direction. These unnamed saints in Jerusalem, walking through the city, appearing to people who knew them, being recognized by people who had buried them, are the early testimony that Holy Saturday's hidden work was already complete before Sunday's announcement. The tomb was already empty of more than just Jesus. There's a question that comes up every year around this time and usually gets a quick dismissive answer. If Jesus was crucified on Friday afternoon and rose Sunday morning, that's not 3 days. It's a day and a half. At most 2. How does 3 days work? Here's the answer most people never hear because it requires knowing something about first-century Jewish counting. In the Jewish reckoning of time that Jesus and his disciples used, any part of a day counted as a whole day. This is called inclusive reckoning, and it was standard in the ancient Near Eastern world. Friday afternoon, even just the last few hours of it, counted as day 1. Saturday, the full Sabbath, day 2. Sunday, even just the first moments before dawn, day 3. 3 days. Jesus repeatedly uses this language to describe what's coming. Matthew chapter 12, verse 40. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And Jonah's story isn't just about a man and a fish. In Jonah chapter 2, he prays from inside the fish, and his prayer uses language directly about Sheol, the realm of the dead. From deep in the realm of the dead I called for help. You brought my life up from the pit. Jonah's 3 days in the fish was itself a picture of descent to death and return from it. Jesus called it the sign of the Son of Man. And then he reenacted it, specifically, deliberately. God had been drawing the shape of Holy Saturday across the Old Testament for centuries. The people just hadn't been able to read the outline until Sunday morning changed the meaning of everything they'd ever read. Now, the passage that almost never gets preached on, Matthew chapter 27, verses 51 through 53, we covered the torn curtain, but the text doesn't stop there. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. Read that again slowly. The tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out. They went into the holy city. They appeared to many people. This is in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 27. Not an obscure text. Right there. 2 verses after the torn curtain. And it is almost never preached on. Why? Probably because it raises questions most sermons don't have time to answer. Who were these people? Did they stay alive? Did they die again? Where did they go after? The text doesn't say. But what Matthew is recording in his typically spare, fact-forward style is that the moment of Christ's death triggered a cascade of events in both the visible and invisible realms simultaneously. Earth shook, physical. Rocks split, physical. Tombs broke open, physical. Bodies raised, physical. People appeared in Jerusalem, physical. And the detail about timing after Jesus' resurrection is significant. They came out of the tombs at some point around Saturday, but appeared to people after Sunday, meaning the power working in the sealed tomb was already pulling other people back from death before the stone was moved. This is not a private miracle for one individual. The resurrection of Jesus is the event that begins to reverse death universally, the first resurrection pulling other resurrections in its wake. A stone dropped in still water, with rings spreading outward in every direction. Those unnamed saints walking through Jerusalem, being recognized by people who had buried them, are the early testimony that Holy Saturday's hidden work was already complete before Sunday's announcement. The tomb was already empty of more than just Jesus. Let's talk about what the early church believed, because they were much closer to the cultural and linguistic world of this text than we are, and they did not picture Holy Saturday as quiet. The artistic tradition of the Eastern Church, going back to at least the 6th century, with roots probably much earlier, produced what may be the most theologically loaded image in all of Christian art, the icon of the Anastasis, the resurrection. And it looks nothing like what Western Christians picture when they think of Easter. It does not show Jesus rising peacefully from a tomb in a garden, glowing softly. It shows Christ standing in a burst of divine light, descending into a dark pit. Beneath his feet, shattered doors, not a sealed stone, doors, broken, wrenched from their hinges, lying in a chaotic X-shape beneath him, scattered around the pit, locks, chains, keys, iron bars, all broken, all destroyed. Beneath the broken doors, in the darkness, a small figure, sometimes shown bound, death, or Satan, or both, trampled, and on either side of Christ being pulled upward by his hands, Adam and Eve, specifically them, the first humans, the ones through whom death entered the world. He reaches down, he grabs their wrists, he pulls them up. This is not a meditation on silence. This is a picture of a violent, total, decisive cosmic victory, and around Christ, on either side, a crowd, the righteous dead of the Old Testament, David with his harp, Solomon with his crown, John the Baptist, Moses, the prophets, all gathered at the gates that just got kicked in, waiting to be brought out. The technical term for what this icon depicts is the Harrowing of Hell. To harrow means to pillage, to ransack, to drag from by force. Jesus did not politely knock on the gates of Hades and ask if anyone wanted to leave. He destroyed the gates. And the early church understood that this destruction was not brutal in the sense of being cruel. It was the unstoppable consequence of divinity entering a realm built for mortals. Death could not hold what it was not designed to contain. The moment the sinless, eternal Son of God entered the realm of death, the walls couldn't hold. Hosea chapter 13, verse 14. Paul quotes it in 1 Corinthians 15. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? He's not asking because the answer is uncertain. He's taunting. He's quoting a line that describes what already happened in Hades on Saturday. The sting is gone. The victory is lost. And the one who did it rested in the tomb on the Sabbath because it was already done. Now let's talk about what happened in Jerusalem on Saturday. The visible world, not the invisible one. There were guards at the tomb. Matthew chapter 27, verses 62 through 66. The chief priests and Pharisees go to Pilate on the Sabbath. Already a remarkable thing, because observant Jews generally avoided Gentile contact on the Sabbath. And they say, "Sir, We remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise again.' So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the third day." They remembered. They remembered what the disciples seemed to have forgotten. The religious leaders who opposed Jesus every step of his ministry retained the memory of his resurrection prediction more clearly than his own followers, because they were afraid of it. And fear has a way of making you pay very close attention. They posted a guard. They sealed the stone. And here is the irony that the whole of Saturday contains. The most heavily secured location in first-century Jerusalem was a tomb in a garden. The people doing the securing were the people with the most to lose if what was sealed inside got out, and what was sealed inside was already past their reach. The guards are watching a door that has already been blown off its hinges in the invisible realm. They are guarding an empty throne while the king is in enemy territory, destroying it from the inside. The stone is sealed. The victory is already accomplished. They are just waiting for Sunday to find out. One more thing before we get to the vigil. The women. Because while the male disciples were behind locked doors on a Saturday, hiding, afraid, paralyzed by grief and guilt, there were women making plans. Luke chapter 23, verses 55 and 56. The women who had come with Jesus from Galilee followed Joseph and saw the tomb and how his body was laid in it. Then they went home and prepared spices and perfumes. They watched where the body was put. They went home. They prepared spices and perfumes. These are burial spices: myrrh, aloe, possibly nard. The process of properly preparing a body in first-century Jewish practice was more elaborate than the hurried wrapping in linen that Friday's urgency had allowed. They were planning to come back Sunday morning and do it properly. They were not planning a resurrection visit. They were planning a burial completion, which means their faith on Saturday was not, "He's going to rise." Their faith was, "We loved him, and we're going to honor his body as well as we can." That's all they had. That's the entirety of their Saturday faith, and it was enough, not because they believed the right thing, because they kept moving toward him. The disciples were frozen in fear behind a locked door. The women were preparing spices, not because the women were more theologically sophisticated, not because they had understood the resurrection prediction better, but because love, when it has nowhere else to go, keeps moving toward the person it loves, even when the situation is hopeless. And on Sunday morning, those women, the ones who showed up not because they expected a miracle, but because they refused to do nothing, they were the first to hear it. He is not here. He is risen. The disciples got the news second. The women who were preparing burial spices heard it first. Holy Saturday rewards the people who keep moving toward Jesus, even when the evidence says there's nowhere to go. Now, I want to bring this somewhere personal, because theology that doesn't touch the ground isn't worth much. Most of us know what it's like to live in a Saturday, not the Holy Saturday, but the pattern of it, the experience of it, the space between something ending and something beginning, where you don't yet know whether the beginning is coming. You're in a situation where you prayed and nothing changed, where you trusted and it still fell apart, where you did everything right and you still ended up here in this specific grief, this specific confusion, this specific dark room with the door locked. And the Saturday question is, where is God right now? Not in the triumphant moments, not on the cross, which is at least dramatic, not on Sunday, which has been promised, right now, in the in-between, when everything is sealed behind a stone and nothing is moving. The answer Holy Saturday gives is strange and specific and more comforting than most people expect. God is working in the places you cannot see, not waiting, not pausing, not resting in the passive sense, working in the realm that your eyes cannot access, in the underground, in the space that looks from the outside like silence. You know what the disciples could not see on Saturday? They could not see Jesus harrowing hell. They could not see the shattered gates. They could not see the keys of death being claimed. They could not see Adam and Eve being pulled by the wrists out of the pit. They saw a sealed tomb. They were sitting in a locked room, afraid, and the most explosive event in cosmic history was happening somewhere they couldn't look. This is the theology of Saturday. Not that God is silent, that God is often working at a depth that the surface cannot show you yet. The resurrection didn't surprise God. It was scheduled. After 3 days wasn't a hope, it was an appointment. And your Sunday, whatever that means in your specific situation, the thing that hasn't turned yet, the thing you're still in the middle of, that also has an appointment. It may be a Saturday right now, but Saturday is not the end of the week. Let's close with the vigil, Saturday night, after dark. In the tradition of the church going back to the earliest centuries, Holy Saturday doesn't end with morning. It ends with the Easter Vigil, the night service that stretches from darkness to dawn. And the very first thing that happens in the Easter Vigil is fire. Outside the church, in the dark. A new fire is kindled, struck from nothing, from flint against steel in the darkness. And from that single flame, the Paschal candle is lit. The Paschal candle, in Latin cero pascali, is typically large, a pillar of beeswax with specific markings, the cross, the year, the letters Alpha and Omega, the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet, and 5 grains of incense pressed into the wax representing the 5 wounds of Christ. This candle is carried into the darkened church. And as it moves through the congregation, people lean their individual candles into the flame, one by one, light from light. And as each candle ignites, the darkness gives way, not all at once, gradually, a spreading warmth from a single source. And then the Exulte is sung, one of the most ancient pieces of liturgical music in the entire Christian tradition, dating at minimum to the 4th century, with elements possibly older. Rejoice, heavenly powers! Sing, choirs of angels! Exult, all creation around God's throne! Jesus Christ our King is risen! Sound the trumpet of salvation! And then, one of the most startling lines in all of liturgy. O happy fault, O necessary sin of Adam, which gained for us so great a Redeemer. O felix culpa, O happy fault. This is not a justification of sin. It is not a celebration of the fall. It is something far more counterintuitive and far more theologically daring. It is the church looking at the full sweep of the story. Creation, fall, redemption, new creation, and saying the depth of the solution exceeds the depth of the problem. What God does in response to the catastrophe of human sin is more beautiful, more glorious, more beyond what was lost than the original garden ever was. The new creation is not a restoration to Eden. It is something Eden was only ever a foretaste of, and the silence of Holy Saturday, the strange, weighted, locked room, sealed tomb silence, is the hinge between those two worlds, between the fallen and the redeemed. Between the first Sabbath, when God rested after making things good, and the 8th day, when God wakes having made things new. And the final words of the Exulte contain something that can stop you cold if you're really listening. O happy fault! O necessary sin of Adam, which gained for us so great a Redeemer. O felix culpa! O happy fault! This is not a justification of sin, not a celebration of the fall. It is something far more counterintuitive and far more theologically daring. It is the church looking at the full sweep of the story, creation, fall, redemption, new creation, and saying, the depth of the solution exceeds the depth of the problem. What God does in response to the catastrophe of human sin is more beautiful, more glorious, more beyond what was lost than the original garden ever was. The new creation is not a restoration to Eden. It is something Eden was only ever a foretaste of, which means, and this is where Holy Saturday becomes personally significant rather than historically interesting, whatever Saturday you're in right now was not a surprise to God. Not the Saturday of grief, not the Saturday of confusion, not the Saturday of sitting in a locked room with guilt you don't know what to do with or hope you can't sustain, or faith that's down to its last thin thread. God builds something from Saturday, something he doesn't build from Friday's anguish or Sunday's joy. The specific formation that happens in the in-between, the trust that holds when there's no visible reason to trust, the love that keeps moving towards someone even when the situation is hopeless, that's what Saturday produces. And that formation in you, right now, wherever you are in the story, is part of the point. Sunday comes. It always comes. But the courage it takes to wait for it, that's the gift of the day nobody celebrates, between the cross and the empty tomb. There is a day of silence that is not empty, that is full of the most violent act of cosmic liberation in the history of the universe, hidden from every human eye. A day when guards stood at a Cecil door, not knowing that what they were guarding had already broken through something far more formidable than a stone. A day when Peter sat in guilt and grief, not knowing that the restoration he needed was already being secured somewhere he couldn't see. A day when the disciples huddled behind locked doors, not knowing that the one who would walk through walls on Sunday was already, right then, walking through the gates of death. Holy Saturday is the reminder that God's biggest moves are often invisible, that the silence is not absence, that the stone being sealed does not mean the story is over, and that sometimes in your life, in your grief, in your confusion, in the thing you don't understand yet, the reason it's so quiet is because what God is doing right now is too deep and too vast and too decisive to make noise while it's happening. Sunday comes. It always comes. But it takes the courage of Saturday to wait for it. If this gave you something, share it with someone who's still sitting in their Saturday. We'll see you in the next one.